There is a major problem with the traditional dumbbell reverse fly. And in this video, we're going to talk about what that problem is, how to problem solve for it, and then what you can actually do instead to fix it. So what's the major problem? Well, put simply, it's just that the reverse fly, as set up like this, is an exercise that is not super well set up to load the rear delts. So let's think about it just for a second in terms of the anatomy and the biomechanics of what the rear delt does and what that means for the dumbbell fly or in relation to the dumbbell reverse fly. So if I'm hinged over like this and I'm moving my arms out this way, you think about, okay, well, what is the dumbbell trying to do to my arm in this position? Well, regardless of where your arm is, the dumbbell just wants to fall toward the ground, right? And ideally, if we're trying to load the rear delt muscle, we don't want something that's pulling us forward like this. Why? Because the rear delt doesn't do this, right? The traps and the rhomboids do this, which is why we do this to load our traps, like a shrug or a Kelso shrug, if any of you have heard of that. So if my arms are moving this way, what I would ideally want to load my rear delt is a force that is opposite to this direction. In other words, I would actually want something that is pulling my hand like this across my body, or in this case, into my leg, rather than down, okay? So just to repeat one more time, the dumbbells, they are pulling down. And so what that means is that there's very little loading toward most of the range of motion. Basically, I can just flop my arms like this, okay? And all I'm really gonna experience are my traps until I start to move the dumbbells. This is typically why you see people start to rapidly accelerate them to actually get some load in the horizontal direction. There's an easier way to set this up for the rear delt, which we'll go over in 1 second. But again, just to really hone in on what the problem is, load on the rear delts will only start to really pick up here, at which point most people are going to end up filling their traps anyway, because the joint that the traps control is actually slightly more loaded than the joints that the rear delts control. Okay, so that's the central problem, is just a load direction problem. Doesn't make the rear delt reverse fly with dumbbells a bad exercise. It just makes it an exercise that is going to be more difficult to actually target your rear delts with. So there's a very, very simple solution here, which is just simply to use one dumbbell at a time. I'll show a cable version of this variation in just a second, and to use your body or really reorient your body to actually load the rear delts. So if I lie down on a bench like this, you can lie down on the bench normally, which I will in a second. I'm just going to show you from different angles. And I start to pull my arm across my body like this, or let's say I rotate my body this way. Now all of a sudden, what is the dumbbell doing? Well, if you see it from this perspective, what the dumbbell is doing is it's pulling my arm, what? Across my body, against which my rear delt goes like this, right? Obviously, you don't want to allow your hand to fall this way because now you're doing a chest fly. But if I just turn a little bit, now what does it look like? Well, it's just pretty much the same thing that we were just doing, except with a resistance and a load direction that is appropriate for the rear delts. Again, why? Because the arm is being smushed toward the body like I just described. It's not being pulled this way, right? So in the dumbbell reverse fly, the way that I just had it set up, the dumbbell on the bottom is actually pulling like this. So imagine you were in this position and a cable were pulling that way. That's essentially what the dumbbell is doing to you in a normal reverse fly. Okay? And when you orient your body sideways, now all of a sudden, not only are you loading the rear delt more specifically, but because you're doing it single arm, your rear delt is getting all the maximum stretch that it can be, and you can just basically hover in this range, which is the range that the rear delt is really going to contribute to anyway, because this stuff over here ends up being a lot of traps, as I discussed, because most of the motion starts to occur through the shoulder girdle sliding backward into what's known as retraction. So many of you might find that to be silly looking, but that's okay. I mean, it's okay for me. I don't know if it's okay for you. Many of you may object and say, oh, it's single arm, it takes more time. It really doesn't, because if you're just doing a set of reverse flies, double arm versus one single arm, right? One arm's work is the other arm's rest. And so for me, I just bounce back and forth between sides whenever I do these with dumbbells, and it ends up taking no additional time. Now, something that is obvious that you can also do is just forget about all of that and just do it with a cable. Why? Well, because you can really easily set up a cable to allow for that same kind of thing. Now, many people, when they do the reverse fly with a cable, will make a very similar mistake. So let's just look at how that might actually look and what you should do to avoid it. So in the same way, before you even grab the cable, you just want to be like, okay, I'm doing a single arm reverse fly. Let me just pull my arm across and see where my hand goes. For me, it's a little bit higher than where the cable is set. So I'll just move it up one. I like to use a cuff. This is an ankle cuff. You can use a normal handle, that's totally fine. And from here, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna turn into the cable so that the cable is already loading me in that stretch position. What a lot of people will do is they'll make the same mistake that essentially the dumbbell reverse fly makes in terms of the force direction, where instead of turning themselves into the cable and having the cable sort of pull their biceps upward toward their chin, right, in that same sort of across loading direction, what they'll do is they'll kind of stand facing the cable, and now look what the cable's doing, right? It's pulling my arm forward. There's no load where the rear delt's really gonna act the most. And then I start to pull out, and it gets really, really heavy toward that squeeze position. Unlike a dumbbell, I think a cable, because it's guided, will feel a little bit better in terms of you getting more rear delt out of it, even with that mistake made. But what I would recommend to you all is if you're going to do reverse flies with a single cable, at minimum, you would want your chest to be facing kind of 90 degrees from the cable. So if the cable is right to my right here, my chest is pointed like this. So here's that angle. You pull the cable out, you brace your opposite hand, boom, you got an exercise that's pretty much going to feel like solely rear delt with very minimal traps. If you wanted to make the case that you could do this 2 arms, of course you could. They're either side of a cable stack, just not super accessible in a busy gym. So I hope all this information was helpful, especially from a principle-based standpoint. Again, I'll reiterate, the dumbbell reverse fly is not a bad exercise, but there are problems with it in relation to the just efficiency of loading. And as a general rule, my advice to all of you is if you're doing exercises that make it really difficult for you to feel the target muscle, like you have to exert a ton of mental effort just to be able to feel something in the muscle, that's probably a sign that the forces are not appropriate for what your goals are. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please ask any questions or make any challenges in the comments below, and check the links in the description if you want to learn more from me directly.